My grandson told me to leave the house, and that's when I understood what was happening. There are words that don't need to be shouted. They're delivered quietly, almost gently, and they land deeper than any blow ever could. Ethan stood in the hallway of my own house. The hallway I tiled myself in the summer of 1987, on my knees for 3 days straight, because I wouldn't hire someone to do what I could do with my own hands. And he told me, without flinching, without looking away, that it was time for me to think about a nursing home, because this house isn't practical anymore, and it's time to let go. He said it the way you tell someone the weather has changed, casually, like it was already decided, like I was already gone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move from where I was standing. I just looked at him. This young man I had pushed on a swing, taught to throw a baseball, sat beside in a hospital waiting room when he was 7 and had his appendix out and was terrified. And I realized something that settled in my chest like cold iron. I hadn't lost him that evening. I had lost him a long time before. And I, because I loved him, and because love makes you want to believe things, had been the last to see it. My name is Walter Hayes. I'm 84 years old. I live in a suburb of Dayton, Ohio, in a house I built the frame of myself and finished over the course of 4 years while working full-time at the machine shop. My wife Ruth helped me every weekend she could. She wasn't a carpenter, she was a school teacher, but she handed me boards and held measurements and made sandwiches and laughed when things went wrong, which they did plenty. We moved in on a Tuesday in October of 1979. I remember the date because we didn't have furniture yet, and we ate dinner sitting on the floor against the wall, and Ruth said it was the best meal she'd ever had. I believed her. I still do. She died 7 years ago. Heart failure, slowly, then all at once. And after she was gone, this house became both the place I most needed to be and the hardest place in the world to wake up in every morning. If you're watching this and you know someone going through something like this, or if you are the one going through it, please subscribe and leave a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. There are more of us than you think. Stay until the end, because what I did and how I did it took everything I had, and I want you to know all of it. I had one son, Michael. He and his wife Linda moved to Charlotte when he was in his 30s, chasing better work, and they built a life there that was good enough that coming back never made financial sense. I don't fault him for that. But Michael and Linda had struggles. Money, the marriage, stretches of both at once. And during those years, Ethan spent a lot of time with Ruth and me. School vacations, whole summers. I was the one who took him to Little League. I was the one who helped him with geometry when Michael didn't have the patience and Linda didn't have the time. I was there when he graduated high school, and neither of his parents could make it. I sat in that auditorium alone, in the second row, and clapped louder than anyone around me. I never once thought of it as something he owed me. It was love, and love isn't a ledger. But somewhere on the road from the boy he was to the man he became, Ethan stopped understanding the difference between what was given and what was his to take. He showed up at my door in March, 31 years old, saying he was between jobs and wanted to help me out. His mother, Karen, Michael's ex-wife, came with him, staying the first few weeks to help everyone get settled. I was glad to have the house alive again. I told myself it was what Ruth would have wanted. There was noise in the kitchen in the mornings, the sound of someone else's footsteps on the stairs, a car in the driveway that wasn't mine. I'd forgotten how much of a house is sound and how loud the absence of it gets over time. The first month was fine. Ethan mowed the lawn without being asked. Karen cooked twice a week, and it was decent food. And then, so gradually I almost didn't notice, things started to shift the way weight shifts in a house that's settling, invisible until suddenly a door doesn't close right anymore. It started with my workshop. I have a workshop in the back of the garage where I've kept my tools for 40 years. Every tool has its place. Not arbitrarily, but because I put it there with intention. Because when your hands aren't as steady as they used to be, knowing exactly where everything is matters more than it did before. One afternoon, I went out to the workshop and found that things had been moved. My hand plane was on the wrong shelf. My chisels were in a coffee can instead of their roll. When I mentioned it to Ethan, he said he'd been cleaning up a little. I told him the workshop didn't need cleaning. It needed leaving alone. He gave me a look, not rude exactly, but patient in that particular way that means the person looking at you has already decided you're not worth arguing with. I remembered that look. Then came the papers. Over the following weeks, Ethan brought me things to sign in small, casual moments. When I'd just come in from outside, when I was finishing dinner, when I was tired and already reaching for my glasses. "Grandpa, this is just for the utility accounts, so I can handle the bills and you don't have to deal with it. This one's for the county. It's just an update on property records. This is a limited authorization, so I can act on your behalf for home maintenance stuff. You don't need to go in person for all that anymore." I signed. My eyesight isn't sharp enough to read small print in bad light without effort, and he always brought things in the evening, and I trusted him. That word, trusted. I say it now and feel the full weight of what it costs when it's misplaced. I started noticing other things. Conversations that stopped when I came into a room. Karen on the phone in the backyard, speaking low, turning her back when she saw me watching through the kitchen window. A manila folder that Karen slid under a stack of magazines when I sat down at the table. The way they started referring to the house in my presence. Not your house, just the house. As if the word had already been quietly transferred to neutral ground. Small things, each one easy to explain away on its own. Together they formed a different picture entirely. I recognized the shape of it without wanting to. I had built enough things in my life to know that you can't understand a structure by looking at one board at a time. You have to step back. You have to see the whole frame. And when I stepped back and looked at everything together, what I saw made my stomach go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the house. The night I couldn't sleep, it was a Wednesday, 2 weeks before Ethan said what he said. I got up at around 2 in the morning and sat in the living room in the dark. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I just couldn't sleep and didn't want to turn lights on. But their voices came through the wall from the kitchen, and what I heard was enough. I didn't hear every word. I heard, "The lawyer said the second form is the one that matters." And then, "Just wait until he signs the last one, then we move." I sat there in the dark for a long time after that. I didn't get up. I didn't make a sound. I went back to bed before they finished talking, and I lay there looking at the ceiling, and I thought very clearly and very calmly about what I was going to do next. I called Frank Bellamy in the morning. Frank had been a real estate attorney for over 30 years before he retired, and he'd been my friend since we coached Little League together in the 90s. He was sharp in the way that certain people stay sharp, not despite getting older, but because of everything they'd seen. I told him I needed to sit down with him about something that couldn't wait. He came over that afternoon. We sat in the workshop with the door closed, and I told him everything from the beginning, from the day Ethan showed up to the conversation through the wall. Frank listened the whole way through without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Get me copies of everything you've signed in the last 6 months, every piece of paper, and don't say a word to either of them." I didn't. What Frank found over the next 2 weeks wasn't a surprise to me, though it should have been. Maybe it says something about what I already knew and was trying not to know. The utility authorization form was legitimate. That one was what it claimed to be. But the property records update was a deed amendment that, in combination with a second document Frank located at the county office with Ethan's name on the filing, effectively gave Ethan administrative authority to act on my behalf in real estate matters. The third document, the one they were waiting for me to sign, was a transfer of primary ownership interest, structured in a way that would have been difficult to challenge because it was built on the authorizations I'd already signed. The buyer listed on the draft was a name I didn't recognize, but Frank traced the LLC back to Karen's brother in 2 days. I went home that afternoon and sat in Ruth's chair, the wingback by the window that still smells faintly of the lavender she kept on the sill, and I made myself very still and thought about what I wanted to do. Not what I felt like doing, what I wanted to do. There's a difference, and it matters most when you're angry. I thought about Ethan at 7 years old, throwing a baseball badly and trying so hard to throw it right. I thought about the graduation where I sat alone and clapped. I thought about Ruth and what she would have said, which was probably something brief and exact that cut through everything. And I decided, quietly and completely, that I was not going to shout, not going to accuse, not going to let them see a single thing until the moment was right. I was going to be exactly the old man they thought I was, confused, slow, agreeable, right up until I wasn't. For 10 days I played my part. I asked Ethan about simple things with a slightly vacant expression. I thanked Karen warmly for small gestures. I moved slowly through the house, as if I had nowhere to be and nothing to understand. And they responded exactly as Frank had predicted they would. They got careless. Karen started leaving papers on the kitchen table in the morning before I came down. Ethan made phone calls in the hallway rather than the backyard. They stopped interrupting themselves when I walked in. I noticed everything. I said nothing. Frank, meanwhile, filed a formal complaint with the county recorder's office, flagging the deed amendment as potentially fraudulent. He also brought in a colleague who specialized in elder financial abuse, a phrase I hadn't known I'd need and that I didn't like hearing applied to my situation, but that I filed away as accurate. And then came the evening. Ethan found me in the living room, settled and composed, and told me it was time to talk. He said the house was too much for me. He said he'd found a place. He actually had the name of it. That was really nice and more my speed. He said it would be better for everyone. He said it the way people say things when they believe the hard work is already done, and this is just the formality. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said quietly, "Sit down, Ethan." He sat. I reached into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt and took out a folded letter, the formal notice from the county recorder's office confirming receipt of the complaint and the temporary suspension of the deed amendment, pending investigation. I unfolded it and placed it on the coffee table between us, smoothed it flat with my hand, and turned it so he could read it. I watched his face. I watched the certainty go out of it, the way light goes out of a room when the power cuts. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "Grandpa, this is a misunderstanding." I said, "I know. The investigators will help sort it out." I stood up, went to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. The weeks that followed were complicated in their own way. Karen retained an attorney and initially attempted to characterize the deed amendment as a simple administrative oversight. That position became difficult to maintain when Frank's colleague presented the documented pattern, the sequential authorizations, the timing of each signing, the LLC registration. The county investigation referred the matter to the state attorney general's office. Karen was not charged, ultimately, but the civil exposure was significant enough that her attorney negotiated an agreement that included a formal relinquishment of any claim to the property and a binding prohibition on future filings. Ethan cooperated with investigators and avoided charges, but his role was documented. He left the house with 2 bags of clothes one Tuesday morning and didn't look at me when he passed me in the hallway. I stood where I was and let him go. Michael called from Charlotte when word reached him. He was upset in the scattered way of someone who doesn't know which thing to be upset about first. Upset that it happened, upset that he hadn't known, and upset in some other way I couldn't fully identify and didn't try to name. I told him I was all right. I told him the house was secure. He said he would come visit soon. I said that would be fine. We left it at that. What I've sat with since, in the quiet of this house, is not really about the house at all. The house was always going to be mine. Frank made sure of that, and the law, when it's applied carefully and with the right documentation, still means something. What I've sat with is Ethan, the 7-year-old, the graduation, the hospital waiting room, and the question of how a person becomes someone who can look at all of that and see nothing but an obstacle to remove. I don't have a clean answer. I've had 84 years to learn that clean answers to that kind of question are usually wrong. What I know is that the love was real on my end. I know that much. And I know that what I did, the patience, the stillness, the waiting, wasn't cold. It was the only way I could think of to match what had been done without becoming something I didn't recognize. You can lose a fight and keep yourself, or you can win a fight and lose yourself. I wanted to win the right way. I believe I did. These days, Frank comes by on Saturdays. My neighbor's daughter shovels the walk in winter without being asked, and won't take money for it, no matter how many times I try. I have a dog now, A beagle named Hank that I got from the shelter in April because the house needed something living in it that wasn't carrying a grudge. He sleeps at the foot of the bed and wakes me up at 6:30 every morning with a patience and consistency Ruth would have admired. I sit in her chair by the window with my coffee, and I watch the light come through the same trees it's been coming through since 1979. This house has held everything I've loved. It is still standing. So am I. I'll leave you with just one question. If someone you raised, someone who benefited from everything you gave without being asked for anything in return, told you it was time for you to go, what would you do? Would you believe them? Would you fold? Or would you go still and watch and wait and prove that age may slow the body, but it doesn't touch the part of a man that knows what belongs to him and why it matters? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you know someone older who's carrying something like this in silence, share this with them. Dignity doesn't have an expiration date. It just gets quieter. And sometimes that quiet is exactly what makes it dangerous to underestimate.